opened up from there. I mean, when you because for me, ministry and what keeps ministers going is this call to serve. And if that's not there, you're probably not going to last too long in the ministry. It's not just something you decide one day, hey, I'm going to become a minister, or I took this survey or something that says, oh yeah, you should be a minister. It says that on the box or something. It's something in here that you're drawn to, be a channel for good and to be supportive of people throughout their lives in a lot of different ways. And but that's how I got into Unity. I like Richard, we were both trained in the medieval period of Unity. That's what I like to say. It's changed so much over the years. But back then, I don't know, maybe he was a little later medieval period. But I was, when I go to ministers groups and we're sitting around talking about, hey, when were you ordained? When were you ordained? And they're all like, well, I was ordained in 2018 or 2015 or something like that. And they look at me and they go, well, George Orwell wrote a book, it was real popular. That's always my smart aleck response. But yeah, I mean, that's what I was ordained. So, but Richard, we've known each other since the Youth of Unity days.
Yeah.
And our chapter was in the Southwest Unity region, as was Richard's chapter. I can't remember which church. You were in Orange County, if I'm remembering right. Yeah. So
yeah, that's right. All right, you get a bonus points for that. You can actually remember that.
Yeah.
Right, let's talk about your book. Let's talk about Wisdom for a Lifetime. What really called you to write that book on the Bible?
Well, I was teaching a class. By then, I had been ordained about 10 years, and I was serving as an associate minister at the Unity Church in Bellevue, Washington. That's in suburban Seattle, or I like to call it Unity of Microsoft, which I think half of the congregation worked there right down the street. And I was teaching a class. It was a class called Old Testament Interpretation. So this is where you have 10 weeks to help everybody interpret the Hebrew scriptures or the Old Testament. And it was just kind of an impossible thing. So you have to kind of gloss over a lot of stuff. And I kept thinking, well, what really helps people do interpretation is not just reading somebody else's interpretation of the text, but coming up with their own kind of read on stuff, their own inspiration about it. And I kept talking to some of my friends. I said, is there a book out there that shows the process by which you can develop your own metaphysical or allegorical interpretation? And I talked to some of the Bible teachers back at Unity Village about it, and they said, really nothing. I mean, we have these little syllabus here or this lesson plan here, but there's no book about it. And the more I kept asking about, trying to find a book like that, the more it kept coming back to me. And I'd never written a book before. I was not what you would call an excellent English student in school, but I kept wrestling with this handbook idea, and it just came to me, maybe you could take a shot at writing something. So I moved on from my job there at the church. We up and moved our family all the way from the Northwest to Topeka, Kansas.
Wow.
Why there? Well, my wife's brother had an extra house they had bought sitting there, and cheap rent, so we moved our whole family to Topeka, and it's near Unity Village. And, that was my intended place to have the book published. And so I spent my own money to just live there very modestly and spent time on a very, what we would call today, antique computer, working on the book and sharing some of the chapters with the editor of Unity Books as I went along, and did research at the local university library there in Topeka, Washburn University. I could walk to it from my house. I carried back these big bags of these really old Bible books and stuff. And so I just began working on this book, and it was just coming through. I mean, I have to say, I wrote it, but a lot of it was just sort of inspiration too. And I wanted the book to have a very conversational tone. That it had to be a book that when you started reading it, you wanted to keep reading it. Not a book like your typical like maybe Bible scholar book that's like, well, where about the fifth sentence you're starting to fall asleep. So I wanted it to be in a conversational tone and to really help anybody who reads the book understand the Bible from a literary point of view. I don't mean literal, but how did it get written and why does it read like it does? Because a lot of times you want to sit down, I'm going to read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and then all of a sudden somewhere along the way you're like, I don't know about this. So it's to help, I wrote it to really help people understand how the Bible came to be put together with good scholarship, but not in a heavy scholarly tone, so I wouldn't lose the audience. And so this was sort of my objective, and that by the end of this book, you'll have basic tools that, in my opinion, Charles Fillmore used, or Butterworth used, and other, Elizabeth Santurner, and other Unity interpreters of our classic history, that their process by which I observed they used to come up with their interpretations. And so it's a handbook, it's a fishing manual, versus, handing somebody a fish, to eat for a day, teach them how to fish, they do it forever. And so the idea here is how do I go about approaching a Bible verse or story, doing the research, doing the work on it, and coming up with my own interpretation that has meaning for me. So that was my goal, to come up with a book that people could really use, ministers could use, teachers could use, anybody could use, to get him back into studying the Bible. Because back in the 90s, we were into everything but the Bible. Right. We were reading Wayne Dyer and I guess early Deepak and all the other, really popular self-help books that come along. I read them too. But we kind of take the Bible and just, I'll get to that later. Where I like it when I hear the minister say something, tell a story and interpret it. But what about me? Well, so I just wanted to rekindle Unity's biblical heritage a bit in the current time, in the modern time. That's why I wrote it.
That's great. So talk to us about when you say metaphysical Bible interpretation, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, metaphysical is a word we use for a lot of stuff. And when we're using, this is me now, in my opinion, but when we're using the word metaphysical with the Bible, we're using it really to understand the allegorical meaning of a verse or a story. That is, what we're reading about is not necessarily about what's going on with the characters of that time. When we're reading the Bible and we're trying to understand the context, there is an original intent of the biblical writers. They were writing for people of their day and maybe a few generations after, but they were not thinking of us today here in 2023. And so what we need to do is, a lot of the stuff is not directly relevant to us, particularly if you go back into the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, and all the different rules, regulations, and things you have to follow in order to be, in good standing with God. It does not directly pertain to us. But if we're able to look for the universal meaning, and that is meaning that goes beyond the generations, that extends to people on into the future. We look for that, and we understand that what we're reading, and if we use the lens of metaphysics, that is, okay, this is all symbology, and these characters, and these names, and these places, and these actions that are taking place in the story, what does that represent, okay, in me? What does that represent psychologically? Okay, we have to look at how does that represent what's going on with my spiritual process. And so it's when we kind of work with that within ourselves, we come up with what I would call metaphysical interpretation. That's how I would define it. And of course, metaphysics has been around since Aristotle. He wrote a book about it. But when we're using the term about interpretation, it's really about allegorical or symbolic interpretation, but with this psychological and spiritual element laid over it.
Okay, so every character in the Bible is an aspect of my own life, is an aspect of myself.
Yeah, that's the idea. And you know, if you look at well, whatever character you're attracted to, well, let's say you're thinking about Peter and walking on the water, and Lord, call me out there, and he goes out there. Well, we always tend to look at Peter as representing my faith and my using my faith. Abraham the same way. So you have all these different characters that represent certain divine ideas within us, certain aspects of our spiritual consciousness and our growth. And so this is the way in which we look for universal meaning. And it is deliberately. Some people might say, well, you're taking the Bible out of context. Absolutely, we're taking the Bible out of context. But we're also understanding that the original intent was written for the people of that day, pretty much. And that what we're doing is saying, okay, that was written 2,000-3,000 years ago. Oh, how can we make it relevant to now? Well, the best way to do that, in my opinion, is the metaphysical approach. And that's what Charles Fillmore did, Eric Butterworth, Emmett Fox, all these guys are, and Elizabeth Sandler.
Right. So when people say the Bible is the literal word of God, Jesus's greatest teachings were not literally true. Right? When Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like yeast placed in bread, that's not literally true.
Oh, Jesus talked in symbology and even told us he was doing that.
Right. So
quite often, when he's telling parables, and he literally is telling you, look, this is going to mean something different than what I'm talking about. Like the kingdom of heaven, like the mustard seed. Well, he's talking about mustard seeds. Is he talking about growing mustard seeds? No, he's talking about your faith. He's talking about you only need a little bit of that and you can run with this. And boom, something's going to happen. Something's going to grow in your life like a big mustard plant. So
if we
it's literally intellectually impossible, in my opinion, to take the Bible literally, Genesis to Revelation. Good luck if you want to do that. And why would you want to do that? I mean,
right, because Jesus's greatest teachings were not literally true.
Well, there are some things that he says that are pretty direct. Yes.
Yeah, but his greatest
it's not like everything
metaphors.
Yeah, right. He used a lot of metaphors. He used a lot of analogies. But it's not to say that everything he said was that, but a lot of what he said was.
Well, I'm talking about the times when he was actually when he was in his teaching mode, right?
Right.
Right. When he was in his teaching mode, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there and it will be done.
Right.
Was that literally true? Or was that a metaphor for the ability to overcome the issues of life?
Well, unless you have a very large earth mover, probably means what you just said.
Right. So
exactly.
So give me one of your favorite Bible stories.
Just a moment, I got to turn off my phone.
Okay, turn off
your
phone.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. We didn't even hear it. Give us one of your favorite Bible stories.
Well, I think one of my favorite Bibles, I'm going to pick one. Okay. Thank you for calling Unity of Bonita Springs. We're not able to take your call right now, but your call is important Yes, our call is important to us. Hold on a sec here. Sorry, I didn't turn
All
that
right,
off.
you do what you got to do. They're calling to confirm your pizza order.
It's true. I forgot about that pizza. Yeah. Okay. Usually most of the calls we get on our landline are, wanting to sell us something. I really love the story about Moses in front of the burning bush.
Okay, so let's
That's
talk about that.
that's one of my favorites,
Great. So
And,
let's talk about that from a metaphysical point of view. So how do we, like, if Moses is, tell us the story and then help us metaphysically interpret that story so it can be applicable for our spiritual life.
well, first of all, Moses represents, well, if you look at the name Moses, it means being drawn out of the water. That's, and the Hebrew name is Moshe. That's his name. And he also represents faith as well. Okay. And for him, in front of the burning bush, which is a representative of God, okay, higher self, speaking to him, all right, tells him of what he's going to do, gives him these instructions. You're going to go and free the Israelite people out of Egypt, out of bondage, out of slavery, out of all the stuff they've been dealing with for a long time. And Moses is at that point, he's not quite Charlton Heston with the gray coming out of his hair. Okay, he's at an earlier stage in his development, like we are sometimes with our spiritual development. And he's hearing this like, you got to be kidding me. And he has a lot of doubts. When we hear that we're going to be doing something that is going to expand our comfort levels, our comfort zones, and so on, there's a lot of hesitation. And Moses expresses a lot of hesitation. He gives a lot of excuses as to why he can't do this. Like, I don't speak well. I don't. When I took speech class in 9th grade, I got a D. I'm interpreting that in a modern sense. But my brother Aaron, he got a B plus. So how about him? Well, eventually, that's what happens. They get to speak through his brother. But it's us wrestling with our own self-doubt. And I think that story helps us maybe relate to it, feel it ourselves, and how we work with that too. And that as time goes on in Moses' life, he ends up becoming, let's say, one of the greatest prophets ever. And for us, we end up excelling. We end up moving our Israelites out of Egypt across the waters, part the waters, come through out into the desert. And he had to prove his faith time and time again that God will supply what they need. And it was. And on from there. So I just think that story, to me, it's a real, I think it's one of the funniest parts of the Bible. I'll be honest. I like the comedy that's in the Bible. And it's not that the writers were necessarily thinking about comedy, but it's one of the interpretive lenses that we can lay upon the Bible if we look at it from a human point of view. Because these were, if we can accept the fact that they were real people and human beings who were fortunate enough or not to have their stories written down for us to read today. So there's a lot of that human interest kind of stuff, and that we can relate to, because we are spiritual beings having a human experience, as Desjardins said. And so,
okay, so
I think
if we look at
Moses, yeah.
Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So if we look at this Moses story, right? Moses gets this call from God, and he's a little reluctant. True?
Definitely.
Great. So if we look at this as our own life, the metaphysics of this is that we're being called, each one of us is being called in our own way to take our next spiritual step.
Oh yeah, and it was for him. I mean, his whole life is a template for us, and
Right.
that it's all about our developing our own faith and expanding our own for our own comfort zones and self restrictions and inhibitions and fears and all that other stuff. And at that moment, in front of the burning bush, he was confronted with his "I don't speak real well." Well, there was a way around that, but he he's an example to us that we too can follow what Spirit is saying to us. We're listening. We get clear about it. A lot of times, we're not so sure. I mean, and this is just one of the stories in the Bible like this. You look at Book of Judges, Gideon, for instance.
Just stay with Moses for a
Stay
minute.
with us. Well, what
All
I'm
right,
saying
stay
is
with
that
Moses.
this whole overcoming and getting clear with God about what you're supposed to do. It's a theme.
Right. Because
Throughout.
and the fire is undeniable.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well.
And each one of us, like there's a part of us as God is inviting us into whatever our next step is that wants to deny the fire.
Yeah.
Right. We don't see it. It's not really for us. It's meant for somebody else.
Right.
This couldn't be my path. Right. We all have this, our own resistance to our next spiritual step.
Yeah, we've all dealt with that. We've
Right.
all dealt with that. We're and the minute we think we're done, the next thing comes along that
Right.
we're going to learn to.
And then because Moses doesn't trust himself, he wants to know the name of God so that he has the confidence to say, well, it's not me.
Right, because nobody's going to believe me if I say it.
Right, because nobody's going to believe me. I'm just a little hick from the backwater, right? Nobody's going to believe me. So give me your name. And then he reveals, I am who I am, which may be the greatest spiritual teaching in the entire Hebrew Bible, right?
Yes, it is a moment where we understand the name of God, and God is pure being.
Right, and that our essence is God essence. Right.
Yes.
And so that moment of confronting your own limitations takes us to a profound place.
Yeah, it takes us to a breakthrough if we embrace it, if we hear what the bush is saying, and we go, okay.
And so even in our resistance, even in our limitations, even in our fears and our insecurities, God's going to drop some bombs on us that take us to a profound place.
Yeah, if we're willing to be receptive to it.
Right. Right. Okay. So group, I want you to really look at where is God, where is Spirit burning a bush in your life right now that you're trying to deny is burning. Right. And where are you being called to take your next step? Because the metaphysics of this is it's not just happening to Moses, it happens to all of us. And we want to pretend, when we look at the Bible, we want to pretend that story doesn't really apply to my life, when the idea is applies to all of our life. And the bomb, the real big deal is that God is saying that's the Spirit of God is not only at work in the burning bush, but is fully present as the I am within you. Right. And that's the kicker. That's the one that makes the biggest difference, is that Moses wanted external authority for what he was doing. And what he was truly given was internal authority. Correct? Is that the way you see it, Alden?
That's an excellent interpretation of it. Yes.
There you go, baby. There you go. All right. All right. So I want to open this up. Now, Alden, do you consider yourself a Bible scholar?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm just a guy who wrote a book. But
Okay.
I read Bible scholars when I'm not sure about particularly the original intent of the writer. That's when I'll go dig out an interpretive Bible text or something like that and read what the scholars say. Who is the likely audience here? What's going on in the scene and that kind of thing. But no, I don't carry all that around in my head. I'm focused more on just the practical aspects of interpretation. But
okay, but you're open
but I get called that all the time. I go, wait a minute. There are people who will spend their whole careers focused on like one book of the Bible, and that's their expertise. So
just like attorneys, right?
yeah,
One
right.
area of the law. All right.
Well, we have plenty of them here in Florida, trust me. No.
I bet. Okay, so I want to open this up. So do any of you have questions about the Bible, about Bible interpretation, about your understanding of metaphysical Bible interpretation? Any questions that you'd like to ask Alden while we have this opportunity to ask somebody who's really spent a lot of time in the Bible? Colleen, go ahead. You want to go first?
Yes, since we don't have your handbook right in front of us, but I do have a Bible sitting on my shelf, how does one get started in, if I had a problem and I wanted to read the Bible for comfort or advice, where would I start, Alden? And do you have a particular Bible that you find easier to read and interpret from a metaphysical standpoint? Mm-hmm.
Where to start? Well, of course, I tell somebody to get my book, but anyway.
There you go, buddy. You gotta say it. Buy his book.
And here's the latest edition of it. And here's the original one here, which I guess there's still some
You
around.
can get it on Amazon, correct?
Yes, you can. You can buy it on Amazon. I'm going to respond to your question in a second, Colleen, but I in 2020 when COVID was heavy, I spent a lot of time revising and republishing and re-editing all of my books, including Wisdom for a Lifetime, through Amazon Kindle Direct. So the book has been improved a lot for modern use, how to use the Bible more electronically, that kind of thing. So that's, I'm just going to mention that as a little mini plug there. If you're just looking for passages to start reading in the Bible, I would look at maybe 3 books. I'd read the book of Genesis. And you can read it from front to back. There's 50 chapters, which really, it's a book that really sets up the whole Old Testament for the most, not everything, but quite a bit of it. The other thing I would maybe take a look at is the book of Psalms. That's usually some of the more, not all of it, but some of the more positive, more uplifting verses are found in there. Like the best verse ever for meditation is in the book of Psalms. I know this for a fact because I asked a rabbi once, what's the best passage in the Hebrew text for meditation? He said, be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. I was expecting something more obscure, but no, that's it. So the book of Psalms, and I'd say the other thing would be the Sermon on the Mount, and that's mostly found in Matthew. So I'd read Matthew, starting at chapter 5 through 7 or so. That's where I would get started reading the Bible. And just looking, you can read it and just allow what you're reading to inspire you or give you insight from these areas. One of the things I talk about a lot in my book, and there are lots of books about this, is what translation to use. Because when we're reading the Bible, English Bible, a lot of times people forget that the writers did not write in English. they wrote mostly in Hebrew and Greek. There's a little bit of Aramaic in the Hebrew Bible, Book of Daniel, and I think it's part of Ezekiel is got a little bit of Aramaic in it, but that's a derivative of Hebrew. But it's all written in a language that we don't understand for the most part. So English translations have been around for a long time. I spend quite a bit of time in my book talking about the evolution of the English Bible, starting back in the 7th century and it's the evolution of the English language is essentially what you're looking at, from Anglo-Saxon, which is Old English, to Middle English, to eventually work of Tyndale, who was one of the greatest Bible translators ever. Most of his work is the King James Bible. They borrowed a lot from it. And on to today. I'm very big personally on using modern translations because that's the language we're used to hearing. There are a few that I think are pretty good. The New Revised Standard Version, the NRSV, they use acronyms for all these books, is a good version. I think this is one, or you can call them versions of translations. It means the same thing. It's a good one. It was produced in the late 80s. There's also the New International Version. That's also from the 70s. And I think there's even an improved version of that. It's a pretty good one. There's also the New Living Translation. And this is a much newer one that has come out. And I found some value in that too. If you're looking for the Bible online, and I gotta be honest with you, I own tons of physical Bibles. I got about 3 of them right here on my desk. I look at them for fun sometimes, but when I'm sitting here preparing a talk or something, I go to BibleGateway.com. You plug that in. I'm gonna say it again, Bible Gateway. If you just start typing Bible in Google, it's gonna come up. And BibleGateway.com, you can look up, I don't know how many translations of the Bible they have in there, but they have all the ones I just mentioned. And you can put in keywords, you can put in actual, chapters from some book you want to look at. You can look up just a specific verse, whatever you like. If there's one website to remember, other than the one from my books, aldenstudebaker.com. But if you're thinking of the Bible, Bible Gateway, and you can look over different translations of the same verse. And I recommend doing that because each translator is part of our interpretation process, because they're doing their best job to take these ancient languages and render it in a language that's accurate to the original as much as possible, but put in a language that we can understand and for their day. So if you're looking at the King James Bible, most of you have heard of that. If you like Shakespeare, you're going to like the King James Bible. That's what I think about the King James Bible. It's a wonderful piece of literature to own. It's what many people in English-speaking countries are of a certain age. I'm looking at everybody's generation here. I'm guessing we're all a little older. That's what we're used to hearing. If you like the King James Bible, but not really crazy about the heavy Shakespearean sound about it, there's a translation called the New King James Version, where they removed all the heavy thee and thou and archaic language, but kept some of the flavor of how certain verses sound. So you can find the New King James Version at BibleGateway.com. And you can look at it and compare to other translations. And I found that to be really helpful. I've always, sometimes I run into trouble with verses that just don't make sense to me. And when I feel like that, I'll look at other ways that other translators have rendered that verse and see if there's maybe a take they have on it that maybe speaks a little better to me. So I hope that helps a little bit. Oh, there was somebody else that had it.
All right, well, I'm going to go to Linda, and then I'm going to go to Nancy, and then Joy. Come on, Linda.
Hi.
Hello.
This is strange, but it's probably not. Yesterday, I was in a meeting with Shad Groverland. It was a UWM Ministries overview class. I'm getting ready to be an LUT. So
congratulations.
one of our attendees mentioned that she wanted to write a book just like yours that you described. And Shad had said, oh, I don't know of any books like that. That would be a really good idea. In fact, I think somebody sent me one. It's laying on my desk. So here I am today hearing there is a book out there. And I'm just, I have not heard of your book through my classes for LUT, SCE, whatever. And I'm just wondering if maybe there has to be something done at Unity to get your book recognized as a tool to be used in ministerial school or LUT school. I think it'd be a great resource. I've done Bible interpretations, but I've had to use their resources, Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, Revealing Word, all the
That's
books.
good stuff.
It's all good stuff. But I think this might be useful too as an updated version for people today now. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't think there are any accidents, but it's just...
Well, I'm going to have to fire my publicist because obviously they're not doing their job.
Amen.
No. I was on a team recently that was reviewing the curriculum. This was right after the convention. It was before the convention. It was earlier in the year, and I was on there with a few other people, including one of Richard's, my colleague Laura Barrett Bennett, who was a Bible teacher at the school for a number of years past, and we're of a similar generation, the three of us. And she's a friend of mine, and there was some chat that came up about the book that I've written, and maybe having it be a part of a reading list for some of the classes in ministerial school, and maybe even the licensed teacher school. And this new version, when I wrote it back in 2020, I actually there's a study guide, or actually a teacher's guide in the back of the book. There was originally a separate book that Unity published in 1998 called, you can see here, Teacher's Guide for Wisdom for a Lifetime. I redid it. I redid everything in the book. And I geared part of, the study guide of the plan for doing classes to a couple of the required classes that were being taught at the time. Pardon me for not having those on the tip of my tongue. I did not. I only took a few of what is today the licensed teacher classes back in the medieval period, like I was sharing with you, and so I don't have that right there. But there's a couple of classes. I think it's I don't have time to look it up, but there were a couple of them there, and I remember sending a copy of this book to the vice president of education of this Deborah Fraunfelder, I think at the time, and saying, hey, I've done this if you're curious about it, and I never heard back. So,
oh my.
So I fired my publicist. I'll have to hire somebody that's better.
Go.
Yeah.
Nancy, what's your question? Then we'll get to Joy.
I just got a quick question. I've got ear problems right now. And when you answered the question about the 3 places you suggest people could go, what was the first one? You mentioned the Psalms and the Sermon on the Mount, but I didn't hear what you said was the first.
Book of Genesis, the first book.
Yeah. I just want to make one comment too. I think what you're doing is so crucial, and I'm anxious to get the book. But there is one thing that I think for a lay person, that the scholarship that finally came out to the world a little bit 40, 50 years after the Dead Sea Scroll, that put in context who the writers were, tried as best they could. to say here was probably the writer, here is probably the audience, here was probably what they were trying to do, was very helpful. And there's a lot of things in the Christian tent historically that took some of those things out of context in the New Testament and made them really justification for some terrible things. So I would think this in context knowledge is a little bit important for us lay people too.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Sam.
I mean, there's so much about Bible scholarship that is their best guess
Yeah,
based on archaeology, based on scholarship. The problem with the Bible is we just don't have somebody there with a mobile phone at the Sermon on the Mount,
Absolutely.
by the burning bush, crossing the Red Sea. I mean, we just have to kind of determine whether or not this is, well, I talk about interpretive lenses in my book. One is this fact? Okay, just the facts, man, right? Jack Webb, Joe Friday. Or are we looking at historical? And when we talk about historical in the Bible, we mean religious history, not history like how we would think about it as a class of history. Because when we're looking at the Bible as history itself, it's written with a purpose.
right.
It's written with, boy, the Israelites came in here and annihilated people all around them and took the hills and all like that, Book of Joshua and stuff. And then they come back again. You're thinking, well, I thought you already wiped them out. No, it's religious history. They're trying to show the glory of the children of Israel. If you're going to do that, well, that's why it reads like that. I mean, the historical part's fun, and the original intent stuff's interesting. But when we're going to get down to applying it to ourselves, that's when we got to step out of the original intent to move on to what's the universal meaning here for anybody, whether it's somebody in 500 BCE or 2023 today. I mean, that's what we're looking for, most of us.
Okay, Joy, what's your question?
Hi, Alden. Alden, I work as a therapist, so I work a lot, sometimes dreams that people have, nightmares, that kind of thing. We were always taught that it's symbolic in nature and that the dreamer is the best interpreter. I was also raised in fundamental religion. So I've been continually shedding that residual. So what's your feedback or your thoughts on revelations? There's it was a dream of John. There's so many interpretations in Christianity. I just wanted to know your thoughts on Revelation.
I think the writer of Revelation was on some serious drugs, is what I think, but what I think not important. The writer of Revelation, again, original intent, universal meaning. Original intent, from my study of Book of Revelation, it's that this writer was writing a message of hope to people in what is today Turkey, okay, Asia Minor, because he talks about the churches there, okay, and to give them hope in sticking to their guns about their belief in Jesus, following their path, okay, in the face of Roman persecution. The Roman emperor who demands obedience. Swear your allegiance to the emperor or to God. And the writer is basically saying, stay with God. Don't swear to the emperor. No matter what happens, it's going to work out for you. That's what I think, and a lot of people think that book was written for. And it was written in a wild way. It was written in code so that if the Romans got a hold of it, they go, what the hell is this? But those who read it, who are, new Christians, okay, well, whatever word they used for believers back then, they go, okay, I got it. The beast in there, is that the devil? Is that Satan? That's the emperor. So that's really the original intent. Now, what do we want to do with that today? Well, it'd probably take more than a 10-week class. Okay. Or 7 minutes. So, yeah, so I hope that's a
No, it's
response that you can run with there. It's
no, it's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
the problem for people who grew up in an Orthodox church, and that could be fundamentalist or whatever, is that they've had the Bible beat over their head pretty hard, and God beat over their head pretty hard. If they're showing up in our churches, they've had enough of that. And I think for them who have a good Bible background and understanding stories, I think the metaphysical approach is probably very welcome. It's a fresh thing. It's something they can use. And they're probably some of the better Bible students than somebody who maybe wasn't raised in as much of a Bible background. If you were raised Catholic, probably not a strong Bible background, somewhat limited. If you're raised in Unity, even worse. I'm sorry, I'm just being honest. But if you're raised in Protestant church, and particularly the more heavy-duty stuff, you're going to know those Bible stories. And it's not, and we really need to do this with our kids in youth ed, and help them at least understand basic stories. It's just part of the culture of the English-speaking world. And not that you have to know these, or Jesus isn't going to like it. No. It's just understanding these basic stories, and maybe having a bit of an understanding of how they might be relevant in that allegorical, metaphysical way. So, but you're right about dream interpretation. Thank God those dreams aren't literal. Sometimes I guess there are some precognitive dreams that are saying, here you go. I mean, our daughter came to my wife before she was born and told her what her name was going to be. Okay.
Wow.
My name is Jennifer. Well, that's her name. So.
Wow. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a great way to end, Alden. We're gonna leave it at that note. All right.
Okay.
I want to thank Alden for being with us today during this hour. Alden, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next week we have another one of my favorites. We have Greg Barrett's going to talk about enlightenment.
Oh, right.
And
Right down the street from me.
I know he is down the street from you.
He's speaking for me in a couple of weeks.
This
Right
month is the Florida Ministers Month, right?
I guess so.
Greg will be with us next week. I think you're really going to like him.
Yeah.
He's one of the smartest guys I know. So he's crazy smart. All right. Anything else before we go? Okay, you guys. Thank you for being Alden again. Thank you for being with us. It's great to see you all. Remember, the rest of the recording will be up by tomorrow. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear your comments about today and how we can support each other more in really living our best lives. So you guys have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Ciao, ciao.